in education. The 2024 NAEP scores, often called the Nation's Report Card, were just released on September 9th, and the findings are raising major concerns about student reading performance across the U.S. I'm Dr. Emily Sherwood. Please like and subscribe for more information about education and literacy. So let's break this down. NAEP stands for National Assessment of Educational Progress. So this is a test that's given all over the country in schools every 2 years. It's a big test. Children are randomly tested at different schools across the U.S., but every single state is represented, and the data is analyzed per state. It's analyzed per student characteristics, so in other words, students with disabilities or English language learners. It's analyzed to see how those students are doing, and it's also analyzed by percentile, so in other words, how students are doing based on their levels of reading. So looking at students who are at a very low reading level, did they go up or down? Looking at students who are proficient, who are advanced, how are they doing? Are we seeing growth in those areas? Are we seeing declines? Or are they staying the same? So basically, we found that reading scores are lower than ever in the NAEP. We have data going back to 1992 showing how students did in this test. And the scores are lower than they've ever been, period. So that's very alarming. But, and this is a big but, the decline is not the same among groups. So the test found something really interesting, and it's the same thing that was found in 2022 with COVID. Basically, the students who are not showing growth and their scores are even declining, the students who are showing declines in scores, in other words, those whose test scores are dropping, are largely students who are struggling. Students who are at the very lowest level of literacy. So these are the students that teachers may have in their class that can't read a sentence, and they may be in the 5th, 6th, 7th grade. These are the students who may have decoding problems. In other words, it's very hard for them to sound out words. Students at very, very low skills. So in other words, what we're seeing is that basic literacy is going down. And that is very alarming for many reasons. First off, from an equity standpoint, the students who are at the very low levels of literacy often have other things going on. They're in poverty many times. Many times they have a disability, or they're English language learners. So this shows that these are the students who are struggling the most, and these are the students that we really need to work with to help them to succeed and to get higher levels of literacy. And so this points to the need for intervention programs. We know that intervention programs work. 95% of students can learn to read at grade level with correct intervention, but this shows that we're doing a very poor job. The nation is doing a very poor job with that. And of course, there are other variables that go into that, such as student truancy, which is at an all-time high. Here in South Carolina, like 25% of students don't come to school on a regular basis. It's very, very high. And there's societal problems going on, a lot of mental health issues, and there's just a lot going on. But this shows that these students are the ones who need academic help the most. And we need to work with these students to help them succeed. We know that when students are illiterate, in other words, when they can't read and write hardly at all, when they even lack basic skills, their prospects are very low for succeeding in life. They are not able to get good jobs, even jobs that you wouldn't think need a lot of education, like factory work or working in retail. Those jobs absolutely require a lot of reading. And so students can't even get a very basic job in their community many times. Students are much more likely to go to prison. There's a very high percentage of prisoners who can't read well. Healthcare outcomes are very poor for students students who grow up and become adults and can't read. In a country without universal health care, many times you can't get work that offers good health care if you can't read well. And many times you can't advocate for yourself, and you can't understand health literature and make good health decisions for you, because that takes some research, and it takes being able to analyze, and it takes being able to read information to make good healthcare decisions. So there's lots and lots of negative factors for being illiterate in this society. And of course, parents who are illiterate often have illiterate children because it tends to go by generations. So this is very, very alarming that we have so many students who can't read even on a basic level. It's pretty shocking, really. The other thing we need to look at is state level breakdowns. So when we talk about research, they're statistically significant which means that it's such a big difference from the previous test or from whatever you're measuring that it's likely that there's very likely a significant problem or something that's contributing to this. So there are only 5 states that saw significant drops. And this is interesting because these 5 states are all over the place. So in the 4th grade test, there were 5 states: South Dakota, Arizona, Nebraska, Florida, and Vermont. And this is really interesting because this is a very, very diverse list. You've got small states, South Dakota, but very few students in South Dakota, very few students in Nebraska. Rural states, Vermont is, a very small state, but it's a very white state. There's not a whole lot of ethnic diversity in Vermont. And it's also in the Northeast where schools tend to have a better reputation. And then you've got Arizona, which, is on the southern border, lots of diversity. And then we've got Florida, which is a huge state. 6% of students in the United States go to school in Florida. So this is really interesting. And if you're from one of those states, I would love to hear in the comments what you think is going on. And I don't know a lot about education in most of these states. I did want to say something though about Florida. So in research, we have a statement. It says correlation is not causation. So just because something is happening, that doesn't mean that it's causing something. There could be many reasons for this decline. However, Florida does have some things going on in their education system. They're having a lot of change in their education system. There's a lot of school choice where children are going to charter schools or sometimes to private schools with government money. Florida is also having what we might call a restricted curriculum. There's an article that talks about how the curriculum in Florida is being restricted. I'm going to put that in the description box if you're more interested. There's a lot of conservative advocacy in Florida that has made it where there are only certain books that can be used. There's only a certain way to be taught. And because of that, some of the research shows that is leading to students not having a wide education and maybe not getting what they need because teachers are so scared to use outside books, use outside resources, outside methods of teaching because the government is so strict. Again, it could be something else. Correlation does not equal causation. But that's something to think about. Are these things affecting schools? And because Florida is such a big state and has 6% of students, that affects the scores the most because these other states are relatively small, especially Nebraska, South Dakota, Vermont. They have very low numbers of students. And so is this something that we need to look at? Are the kind of philosophical arguments going on in schools, are those affecting education? Are they taking away from education? Are they taking the focus away from education? What is that doing to students? And I don't know the answer. I have really strong beliefs on this, but as far as I know, nobody's done like a huge quantitative study looking at that. But I would find it very interesting to know that. We do know for school choice that it tends to increase inequity. In other words, those students who with disabilities, English learners, students in poverty, they tend to not do well under school choice because they can't always access the choices. Many of the private schools still charge tuition on top of whatever the voucher is that the government gives. Many times schools will not accept students who have something going on, like a disability or learning English. So again, those students who are struggling the most are the ones who tend to suffer under that system based on research. So yeah, that's just a thought. That's just a thought about one reason why this may be going on. Again, if you're not in those states, if you're in any other states, including some states that don't have the best reputation for education. I'm in South Carolina and it doesn't have the best reputation for education, but its scores are pretty much flat. They went down a little bit, but not much. It's these 5 states that went down a lot. So very interesting findings here. Again, it suggests that we really need intervention programs, but also that things going on in the states can be affecting education. And from a policy standpoint, I'm not sure there hasn't been a lot of research about that. So I would find that really interesting. So if you're from one of these states that I mentioned, please in the comments, tell me what you think. And until next time, thank you so much and keep learning.